Hey, it's me, Mike. You've heard my voice a few times before on the show. As you may know already, Dan and Jake are in Arkham Asylum. The trial was pretty quick, and you wouldn't believe how many character witnesses there were. They're not supervillains. They're just dumbasses. So now I'm here in the studio, alone. Always alone. I couldn't let their dream of making everyone a DC Comics fan die with them in Arkham. At least, I hope they're not going to die. They may never get out. So I rounded up as many teams as I could to try to find the replacements. Here goes nothing.
Over the past year, Dan and Jake have had many different gigs. Only thing is that they're not great at work. For example, they landed a part-time job at Ace Chemicals. Dan traded some of the acid they made for tickets to the Flying Grayson Circus show. Turns out the trade was to Tony Zuko, who used acid on the ropes. To say the Graysons had a bad performance would be an understatement. Or more recently, they tried their hand at government work. Some guy named John was engaged them in a prank war. Jake upped the ante by putting his watch in the intrinsic field generator. John was a little blue about that when he was sort of ripped apart atom by atom before becoming an omnipotent god that always hangs blue dong. None of these have been on purpose. I mean, they're not villains, right? Well, tell that to Batman. While en route to their podiversary party, the Super Sons were apprehended by Batman himself. Batman's solution was to throw them into Arkham, and that's where we come in. Because Mike, the producer, needs duos to try out to audition to replace them while they're in Arkham. There's no way they're getting out anytime soon. Well, legally, that is. And that's why we're here. Hello everyone, welcome to this special episode of the Super Sons. I am not a Super Son, but I am Steve Lacey.
And I am likewise not a Super Son, but I'm Adam Williamson.
And you might know me and my voice from my long-running podcast, The Fantasticast, taking a look at every issue of the Fantastic Four from the beginning of the Marvel Age of Comics. We've been going for about 8 years and have gone through the entirety of the 60s and the 70s, and they're just nibbling away at the 80s.
And you know me from nowhere, or probably comic book Twitter.
Right. So this could be like your secret crossover origin story, like Blue Beetle from Infinite Crisis.
Yes, this is absolutely my chance to come in, get started, get immediately rebooted, last for a couple of years, get rebooted again, and then get forgotten.
Oh, man. I miss Jamie.
I miss him so much.
I'll say that actually properly. I miss Jaime. Yeah.
He was such a good Blue Beetle.
Anyway, we have been asked and indeed tasked to come and take a look at the very first episode of Arrow, which was about several billion hours of CW TV superhero shows ago. But was also only about 8 years ago. It's so much seems to have happened in that time. So we're going to take a look at Arrow in general and then home in on that pilot episode and talk a bit about it.
Absolutely. So shall we talk a little bit about this weird bit about TV?
Yeah, so I guess we should start with just generally what Arrow is. If you've never seen the show before, you got plenty to catch up on. But it was the first of what's now known as the CW superhero shows, or the Arrowverse, or sometimes the Flowerverse, and then the Legends of Tomorrow. Then the Legends of Tomorrow fans get annoyed that they don't get to be in that, so we tend to drop that one. But this debuted only a year after Smallville came off the air, and Smallville had 10 years of being on the air and had its own Green Arrow as well. So launching a Green Arrow show off the back of that, without that Green Arrow, without any connections to the previous show at all, was seen as a bit of a surprising move. I'm not saying that Justin Hartley was a bad Green Arrow, but it was there's still a bit of a decision to take to move away from his version of the character.
Oh, it was absolutely mind-blowing. I remember when I first heard that they were making a Green Arrow show, I assumed it was a spin-off with Hartley.
And that would have been a good call to make. Ultimately, I think a much better call was to start all over by itself. There was Smallville had never been the most realistic of shows, shall we say, even bearing in mind it was about young Superman. But by the time it had ended, it had done literally everything except put Tom Welling in the suit and make him fly, thanks to that awful ending. But we'd had Apocalypse in the skies of Metropolis ready to take over and destroy the Earth in the finale, as an example. They'd done plenty of things. We've had the Legion of Superheroes, we'd had the Justice Society of America. They built up their own universe. And I'm kind of glad there was a kind of wiping of the slate and starting again, because even with the odd misstep along the way, what's been built since then has been so much more ambitious and astonishing in what it's achieved. But Arrow started. It launched in October 2012. So a little over 8 years as far as we're recording, in the middle of November 2019. Had been in development for most of that year. Basically, it got picked up pretty much as soon as New Year happened, and it was a collaboration between Andrew Kreisberg, Greg Berlanti, and Mark Guggenheim. Guggenheim had history in comics, as an example. He had runs on certainly on Superman at that point. He'd been in there in around sort of 2005, 2006-ish. Berlanti was kind of best known for writing the a Green Lantern movie at that moment. It got better. Yeah. And Kreisberg had he'd been a writer on many different shows around the place, including Warehouse 13, Justice League, the animated series. He'd done some Simpsons work. Most recently, he'd basically been involved in Fringe in its first couple of years. He'd gone through according to his Wikipedia, he'd been working on the proposed Booster Gold series that was happening in the early 2010s, but it didn't actually happen. The Wikipedia optimistically says it is still to be in consideration at the network. Yeah, sure.
I'm still waiting.
Yeah. And then, he became one of the core teams behind the CW Arrow shows until he was accused by a number of people of sexual harassment and was fired in late 2017.
Yeah, what's kind of amazing about it, just looking from a production standpoint, is there was nothing to suggest this show was going to be anything other than a very standard CW show. Probably the most it had going for it was that it had someone who had written a comic book, but even that wasn't that unique compared to what Smallville had.
Yeah. And the CW shows were very much a genre at that time, which was generally well written, but not the highest budgets in the world, but they were very good at spreading those budgets. And it tended to be people who were cast who were incredibly good looking and didn't necessarily always bring the acting talent behind it. Like, there was a certain look to these shows as well. Like, you could pick out a CW show shot at night from kind of most other shows shot at night, as an example.
There was a skit on Mad TV that referred to it as the Pretty White Kids with Problems Network. And it was very accurate.
Oh, man. Just adding a few capes and you've basically got it now.
Yes.
But Arrow was a big moment in the sand for them. And we'll look at how it was as we start taking a look at the pilot, which was first broadcast on October 10th, 2012. Story by Greg Berlanti and Mark Guggenheim, but the teleplay was by Guggenheim and Andrew Kreisberg, and directed by David Nutter, one of the kind of the most eminent of TV directors. He's the guy you get to direct a pilot episode.
Yes.
Basically. But I've talked enough. I think you've got a nice synopsis of what happens in this episode.
All right. Well, buckle up, because this is a pilot in every way, shape, and form. One of the most impressive things about the Arrow pilot is that they managed to fit a lot into about 42 minutes. And this one throws us right into the action with probably my favorite bit of early Arrow work. We're going to be going on the island. We have a behooded figure who running about doing some low-level mid-2000s parkour and setting a big bonfire on fire, at which time we find out that he is, in fact, a shipwreck survivor on an island with a very familiar orange and black mask. We flash forward just a little bit to present-day Starling, not Star, but Starling City, with Oliver Queen finally making his way home after being lost and presumed dead with his father for several years. When we come home, we are quickly introduced to our core cast of characters for Season 1 of Arrow. This is Oliver, his mother Moira, his little sister Thea, and his best friend, Tommy Merlin. A little while later, we'll go ahead and catch up with Laurel Lance, a crusading attorney, and her father, the police chief, or at least detective. It's never really clear in these early episodes exactly what his position is. We do a little backup. We have some uncomfortable moments with Tommy and Thea. And then we move right into the action where Tommy and Oliver are kidnapped. This is our first big fight scene in Arrow, and Oliver rather handily and, for the time, very brutally takes out 3 masked goons. When he is finally asked about this, he claims that a man in a green hood saved them, not setting himself very well for secret identity. We now move on to the meat of our story, where we find out that Laurel is working against a criminal / businessman / all-around slimy individual called Adam Hunt. But she's also going to have to deal with the fact that her ex-boyfriend / her brother's ex-boyfriend, it's complicated, Oliver, is back and alive. Oliver reveals that he has a little book full of bad guys. And in this book is Adam Hunt, and he will be hunting him down. Meanwhile, we're also going to meet Andrew Diggle, a man who has about 5 lines and is going to become incredibly important to the Arrow mythology. We're going to go to the club Verdant for a party to find out that Thea has a drug problem, shockingly bringing us back to some of the weirdest stories that Green Arrow was ever part of. And we're going to get a lovely murder that I'm sure will have no ramifications about 6 years down the line. That's pretty much Arrow for you, as Oliver throws a giant reward out to people who can find the man in the green hood, and Detective Lance seems very upset.
Yeah, it was weird going back to the start.
Oh my god, yeah, it's such a different show.
Because one of the things Arrow's done over the years, sometimes very successfully, other times not very successfully, is reinvent what the show is. Mm-hmm. So at times it's a show about vengeance, at times it's a show about a super team, at times it's right now it's hopping between different Earths and kind of mixing up the preparations for the crisis with looks at the show's history. So to kind of sit there at the start and look at everyone and how young and fresh-faced they are, literally. It was weird. And of course, most of the cast for this first episode are nowhere to be seen now.
No, almost all of those characters are dead now, or the actor is playing a different character.
Yeah, there isn't a single person who is current main cast in Series 8, who was main cast in the first series, who is playing that same person, or is still on the show. So, Thea Queen, spoilers, is someone who's still alive, guest starred, I think, the 3rd episode of Series 8, but yes. The actress Willa Holland is no longer part of the main cast.
No, it's really just Oliver Queen and Diggle. We don't even have Felicity in this episode, which is just something I had retconned into my mind that she'd shown up, but it's going to be a minute before she's actually getting a speaking part.
Yeah, and so shall we start right at the start, which is the rescue of Oliver from the island?
Yes.
And there was I've seen Lian Yu, and it's just like, oh, you've some good times on there, and wow, were there some bad.
I was very happy to see the flashback wig. It is one of my favorite storytelling devices they have is Oliver's terrible wigs, and it's been gone for a little while.
See, weirdly, the flashback wig looks okay in the first shot, but then he gets onto the boat where he's got the blanket around him and nobody thinks to say put him inside so he can be warm. And it looks so bad there. But I really remember watching this for the first time, and when the camera pans across, you've got the Deathstroke mask with the arrow through the eye. I was really pumped for that because Smallville had done Deathstroke and done him very, very badly. Not as badly as Deadshot, but it wasn't good. Michael Hogan is great, but he is not Deathstroke. And, of course, this Deathstroke mask would be a fake out, as we would eventually get the Manu Bennett Deathstroke, who, holy crap, is still one of the best things the CW shows have ever done.
Yeah, I remember grabbing my wife by the arm when we were watching this first episode and going, holy crap, that's Deathstroke, and she didn't really care. But that was a very big deal to me. I was also struck by how very Batman Begins this whole opening sequence, this whole episode really is.
Well, that's the aesthetic they were going for. You know, at the time they were putting this into action, Avengers hadn't happened, so the primary aesthetic you went for as a superhero thing was the Nolan Dark Knight trilogy. This was the year that Dark Knight Rises came out, and the influence of The Dark Knight was still very, I mean, it still is strong now, but it was the thing.
Right.
You know,
right.
Other things have overtaken since, but if you know, it is perfectly natural that they wanted to recreate that the look of that show and the filtering and just everything on television.
Right. I mean, everything down to the color palette is incredibly influenced by Nolan's movies. And Arrow never really gets to be the brightest or the most colorful of the CW shows. But how washed out everything is in this first episode was very, very surprising to me because I must have mentally gone back and edited in the current way the show's shot.
Yeah. We then kind of go straight into a little bit of exposition via News Network, and then we skip past some of the stuff I actually find myself as a current viewer really wanting to see, which is Oliver reuniting with his family.
Yes.
And that's all just skipped past. We just get his mother getting some exposition while Stephen Amell stares out of a window.
You know, I was very much struck in the first episode by how powerful a presence Moira Queen is. She does not get a lot to do in this episode until the little in tag.
Yeah.
And yet she is by far the most dominant actor in any scene she's in.
And she's probably the most experienced actor in the show as well, with the exception possibly of Colin Salmon, who is a phenomenal British actor, a great star of stage and screen. But, I mean, Colin Salmon was one of the reasons why I wanted to watch this show in the first place, because I think I first came across him when he was one of the supporting cast in the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movies. But he's just got this great presence, and I really like watching him. So it kind of made me sad when he drifts away from the show in about halfway through the season when he's kidnapped so that he can appear on Strictly Come Dancing, which is the original British version of Dancing with the Stars. And then the show moves on as the show does.
You know, I hesitate to say that any Arrowverse show has dropped plot threads because they're very good about coming back to them much later. In Arrow's case, sometimes 5 seasons later, but he is definitely someone who just kind of slowly fades away.
Yeah, and it's a shame we never got a chance to see him and Alex Kingston share scenes.
Oh, also, speaking of things that I dearly missed from these opening scenes, how cool is Queen Manor?
Yes, I'd really forgotten that until it popped up. It was like, oh yeah. I mean, exterior, yeah. I mean, I'm really glad the show moved away from it because there's a lot to be said about him holed up in a stately home on the outskirts of town.
Sure. And I think, you know, once we start to shed our Batman a little bit, Queen Manor takes less of a driving force in the show, but it is a gorgeous, gorgeous place. We'll get its establishing shots of it for the next year or so, and I miss them. And it was nice to see it again this year in Arrow, actually.
Yes, they found a reason to go back to it, and it's I gotta say the way that Series 8 of Arrow is linking back to the past, but in ways that skirt just the right side of indulgence and still allow the show to move forward is really great. It's not like during the 100th episode, which was part of the crossover, and it felt like, oh yeah, all the alien invasion stuff is going on hold, so we can take a look back and go, oh, haven't we done a lot?
Yes, it's they're taking their very well-earned victory lap right now for anyone who's not keeping up with Arrow, and they are doing an amazing job really paying homage to the past while keeping new viewers entertained. And I'll be very happy to see how it all ends up very shortly. But we're not there yet.
No. Having mentioned two Brits in supporting roles, we should talk about the Brit in the main role. Quentin Lance is played by Paul Blackthorne.
The very wonderful Harry Dresden from the short-lived sci-fi Dresden Files TV show.
Yeah. He is... I gotta say, there are times over the course of the years where he really grates on me as a character, and Blackthorne pushes the accent into pastiche a bit too much. I think especially during the drinking years. That's for the character, not the actor, just in case any lawyers are listening to. But he's a really integral part of Arrow. And he when he left the show last year, he left a hole that has yet to be filled properly.
You know, the older grizzled authority figure is a lovely trope that most of the Arrowverse shows have tried out, but I don't think anyone's ever done it as well as Blackthorne, because Quentin Lance is such a fully realized character from the word go that he doesn't feel like he's supporting as much as he's just part of the story.
I feel like I want to disagree with you a little bit, because he's caught in the kind of the vengeance thing. I hate you because of what you did to my daughter kind of thing. It feels like he's trapped within that. And to me, the character really expands once he starts taking his steps beyond that very limited character scope. In the first kind of, I don't know, is it sort of half a season or so? The way he grows and develops throughout the subsequent seasons is what really makes him a character that I like. But the first season, I feel like he's kind of hitting the same notes a lot because the writers aren't doing too much with him.
I guess it might be more fair to say that by the standards of Arrow Season 1, he does a very good job of portraying a fully fledged character, because I think that's hard to do in the first, 12 episodes of what, let's be honest, probably shouldn't have gotten a second season by today's metrics.
Well, literally by metrics, we can talk on that later.
Yes.
But before we move on to sort of ground the scope things, shall we look at some more of the characters we've got on the show? So another one who's no longer on the show is good old Tommy Merlin.
Boy, was it nice to see Tommy and how young he is in this episode.
Yeah, so he was a main cast member for the first season. Events at the end of the first season did not require him to return, shall we say. Although, like with anyone else who's been on a CW show, he's made plenty of returns.
Yes.
It's weird. I don't particularly like Tommy Merlin throughout the entirety of his I'm Alive phase. But the second he's dead, what that character means and his subsequent returns have carried so much weight because of that.
Oh, he's absolutely Oliver Queen's Gwen Stacy. I mean, I did not care about the character at all when he was alive. As a matter of fact, I cringed every time he was on the screen because he's got some great lines like calling Oliver Queen's underage sister hot.
Yeah. He does also get the pop culture stuff. So he gets the inevitable Lost reference in. Oh, a show set on an island with flashbacks. And he gets to the Twilight mocking thing as well. And
yet he's so close with the family, he eats dinner with them as soon as their lost son comes back from an island.
Yeah.
Terrible, terrible character. I think he was really the most CWE of the early cast. But great actor.
There's an undercurrent of something maybe going on with him and Thea in this early episode where you're just not quite sure what was the nature of their relationship whilst Ollie was away. How does he look upon Thea as she goes from being 12 to 17? There's a lot of creep in him.
And let's kind of be happy that he died before the things that are revealed in season 2 get revealed.
Yeah.
Without spoiling that for anyone who has missed the last 6 years of the show, that could have gone into some very awful territory, and I'm very glad it didn't.
But so who else have we got as main cast in this first episode? I think we mentioned Thea. Shall we just talk a little bit about Willa Holland?
Yes, let us definitely talk about Willa Holland. not great at playing nebulously drug addicted, but very good at other things in this episode.
Yeah. There's kind of the scene where she's at the club and she's kind of drunk, high, whatever, and then illicitly taking some drugs in the most unillicit way I've ever seen. It isn't great, but she really kind of, I like the fact that she is just openly damaged by the loss of her brother and father. And yeah, okay, when she's railing at Oliver in the club, there's power to that. I lost my dad and my brother in one go, and I didn't have anyone else. And I if anything, I'd like to push a little bit more that she was 12 when this happened in an extremely dysfunctional family.
Right, and that's something I think we get a much better look at as this season goes by, because we do it. Season 1 and Season 2, we get a lot of looks at how the Queen family functioned before Oliver left. And she's doing a lot of really heavy lifting of the emotional exposition. And her chemistry with Amel is just off the charts.
Yeah, the two of them work really well together, and Holland would become a really, really integral part of the show. Throughout, especially once she started to focus on her abilities rather than just being the civilian without knowledge.
Speaking of which, I think we need to talk about another location that is a co-character, which is Verdant, the club that they are in now and will spend an improbable amount of time in for the next couple of years.
It's a big set. They got to do something, but yeah.
It reminds me, actually, to kind of fly back to Smallville for a minute, it reminds me a lot of the coffee house set on Smallville. It is clearly a big, expensive set that they have to shoehorn in as much as possible to justify it in their budget.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad they came to it in the first episode.
Before we move on to some other physical things, there's two other people we need to talk about from the main cast. One is Katie Cassidy, who plays Dinah Laurel Lance, who, wow, I almost didn't recognize her.
She's so young in this episode. They've done, her makeup and hair is very different from what it will be. And her portrayal of Laurel is almost completely different than what I'm used to seeing now in 2019.
Yeah. They're very much going for Rachel from Batman Begins with her.
Yes.
Which is the young, high-flying, socially motivated lawyer with the personal relationship thing. There's a lot about her look which just throws me, not least of which because Katie Cassidy now has had 8 years of very physical training. She looks lean and, like she's been doing this for 8 years, whereas the Katie Cassidy of 2012 is an actress in her early 20s, but without those years of physical regime behind her. And I really hope no one's saying that I'm suggesting that she's fat or anything like that, or body shaming her. It's just that there are two very different looks between those characters. And yeah, you're getting, not the greatest performance from her in the pilot, because they really aren't asking her to do much except be conflicted. But the show hasn't yet offered you the reasons for her to get into that conflicted nature and for you to understand that.
And I think to a degree, Laurel flounders the first bit of the show anyway.
Yeah.
And I did not realize until I was watching this pilot again. Apparently the fact that she is Dinah Lance, the Black Canary, was kind of supposed to be a shock because they don't mention her full name until the last 5 minutes of the show. Yeah.
But considering how long it took for them to do anything with Black Canary, and I think it's a good thing that they did, and it had to be Sarah that eventually did that. As I mentioned, Sarah, shall I just go, that's not Sarah, and move on from her, because it's a different actress playing Sarah Lance in the pilot, an actress called Jacqueline McInnes Wood, and not, as we all know, I'm just looking her up. Sorry, I forgot their name.
Katie Lotz.
And not as we all know, Katie Lotz, who is phenomenal as Sarah Lance from the moment she gets cast in season 2 of Arrow to leading Legends of Tomorrow, to the point where, frankly, it's her show and not Brandon Routh's, even though he was the big star when that show launched.
I literally have in my notes here in front of me, hey, that's not Katie Lotz.
It's not Sarah Lance. It was someone impersonating your sister.
At this juncture, I'm almost surprised that actress has not come back in an Elseworlds episode.
I have a feeling this is one of those things they'd be quite happy to just go, yeah, we had different plans in season 1. We had no idea how important that character was going to be. We weren't casting for the long term. And for everyone to just be okay with that.
Yes.
And then the last member of the main cast is David Ramsey as John Diggle. You said Andrew Diggle in your recap, and it's like, no, the two are very different.
That's right, that's a different Diggle. This is John.
Yeah, so John Diggle, in this episode, very much a bodyguard who's being given the runaround, but has enough nous and smarts to show Ollie that he's not going to have it easy.
He is, and he is also, very surprisingly, barely in this episode.
He was kind of for me, he was the first breakout character of this show. He was the first one where I was like, I just want every scene to have Diggle in it, please.
Yes, he is immediately so much cooler than everyone else on the show.
Yeah. I really think the show would have struggled to find its tone over those first 3 or 4 months without Diggle in it.
Now, what's interesting to me also is that we get no real characterization of Diggle other than he's a very competent gentleman.
Yeah.
And we're going to go really, really heavy into Diggle over actually the next handful of episodes. But for now, he is the very cool set dressing.
Yeah. Diggle, it's hard to state just how good he was as a character in those first few episodes, because he's such an integral part of the show now. We all know the capabilities of David Ramsey as an actor. We all know the place Diggle inhabits on the show and what it means for Oliver when Diggle's not around. But yeah, those early episodes where Oliver would try and get away, and either Diggle would, miss it and then be like, damn, or he would catch Oliver in the act. And in the second or the third episode, he completely blocks Oliver his attempts to run away and be hero. And it's just brilliant to watch. And we should also note, Diggle is taking the surname from Andy Diggle, who is a former editor of 2000 AD. He's a comic book writer. He wrote The Losers for Vertigo. He wrote with Jock, the artist, Green Arrow Year One, this incredibly, really good Green Arrow origin series. That was obviously very, very influential, and that's why he got name-checked here. I've met him a few times. I've never actually asked him how he feels about just this character just keeps going on and on and on with his name.
Who had made his way into the Green Arrow comics as well?
Yes.
Which is very cool.
The New 52, he turned up during one of the phases of the Green Arrow comic there.
Yes. And then...
Which will make sense, because Arrow didn't exist when the New 52 started, so it couldn't have been before then.
Absolutely not. But again, I can't say enough good things about Dig.
Yeah.
He's continues to be my favorite character. I hope when Arrow's over, he somehow shows up in the other shows.
Yeah. Considering everything that they've been through and everything that he's been through, he maintains that thing of being the everyman.
Yes.
I think there's a lot that people can see and recognise in him in terms of how he reacts to things. Just a little thing, like everyone can get zoomed around the country by the Flash without any problems. Diggs the guy is just like, oh God, I need a moment.
It's something that we get a little bit in this show in the early seasons, but he is the only person who perhaps does not realize he is in a superhero universe and reacts how we all would.
Mm-hmm.
That's the main cast, which is smaller, much smaller than it will be at any point going forward.
Yeah. There is one more thing that makes an appearance here that would become very tropey for the early seasons of Arrow, to the point where I really hope it turns up in the last episode, and that is our good friend, the Salmon Ladder.
Yes!
The Salmon Ladder is synonymous with this show.
Again, this is in my notes. R.I.P. Salmon Ladder. It is...
Yeah, it is as synonymous with this show as Barry Allen not talking to his family about secrets, or Sarah Lance shagging any woman in history is to Legends of Tomorrow.
It is, they didn't keep the upside down, I don't even know what to call that exercise, the upside down sit-ups that are suspended, but they kept that salmon ladder for a good 4 years.
Partly because Amell can do it.
Right.
There's no stunt people doing that. He does that by himself. And I think it just looks cool.
It is a very cool way to show off that someone is very strong. He did it for a charity special of American Ninja Warrior, so
that was great.
There are absolutely no special effects there. Apparently he and Katie Lotz can both do it, and everybody else fails miserably when they try.
But I hope on the DVDs there's just like everyone who's been right. Your turn. Like, how high can you get? Just some fun with that. I mean, there's this whole scene where he goes and starts building the first version of the arrow cave with basically some physical training stuff and some space for him to engineer some arrows. And what I noticed during that is you've got this long musical piece which includes the dun 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 dun, which would be used for the title card for every episode. But hearing that as a full piece with music coming into it, music coming out of it was quite something.
If you really look at this sequence, I think this is the sequence that is the most Christopher Nolan inspired, because this feels so much like Bruce Wayne putting together the Batcave in Batman Begins.
Yeah, and bits of it. I also get flashes to Ben Affleck pulling those tires in BVS.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it is a really good trope to have the montage of the guy building his own base. It's married to voiceover a lot of the time, and I definitely want to talk about the great voiceover work that's done in this episode in a little bit, because I find it hilarious. But yeah, the arrow cave and the salmon ladder and his improbable number of green arrowheads all show up right from the word go.
And he didn't have the decency to order 10,000 of them, so it would look absolutely normal.
Right, yes. Also, he's using a very different bow in the pilot than he's going to end up using later in the series. Mm-hmm. We have that Lian Yu bow, which... I guess we don't note the fact that the island's called Lian Yu. We're not going to learn that for a while.
No.
But yeah, that bow ends up being very story important, and we are going to not use it in the modern era. So it's kind of cool to see that bit player show up on the screen one more time.
Mm-hmm. Just one thing I just realized because I was skimming through the Wikipedia page. When you talk about how good it was to see the mansion again, you know why it looks so good?
Why?
It was also the Luthor mansion from Smallville. So long before they nicked the Kent farm for that amazing moment in Supergirl during the last year's crossover, Arrow was borrowing Smallville sets.
Oh my... You're right.
Yeah.
You know, I was a devotee of Smallville. I watched all of the seasons, no matter how much it hurt me. And, I guess that's why I love it so much. And, you know, all in all, Arrow did a spectacular job with its sets in that first season. It did not look as cheap as most of the CW shows of the time looked.
No, and that was one of the things that really sets it apart, partly because it could focus on physical things. It wasn't trying to do digital things. So unlike Supernatural, where you've got to animate demons with CGI and stuff like that, at the point where, you know, it would still take a couple of years before they could start reaching for that with Flash. They can focus on making it feel like a well-shot but grounded show.
And it definitely shows, and that's probably part of what helps it have so much longevity, because for a show that is, you know, 10 plus years old now, I guess, it looks really, really good.
And the costume looks good as well. I mean, it would go through multiple redesigns. It would get brighter and brighter, but it looked... The Smallville Green Arrow costume looked a little bright and silly.
Yes.
A lot of the time. Whereas this, it feels like something that could have been made. There's definitely an aesthetic going on with it, but it's very grounded, again, following that Nolan line. It was designed by Colleen Atwood, who is a 12-time Academy Award nominee for Best Costume Design, and she won 4 times Chicago, Memoirs of a Geisha, Alice in Wonderland, and Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. So that's quite a background there. And and she's worked heavily with My Chemical Romance as well. And, she would do the initial designs for The Flash and for Supergirl.
And, just looking at that early costume, I am struck by how much better it is than even some of the more recent costumes that have made their way to Arrow. Because Arrow had not established its weird half comic book aesthetic.
No,
it's the new costumes are just fine. There's nothing wrong with them. It's just they have a very specific, this is an Arrow character feel to them.
Yeah.
And this one's a little bit more wild, a little bit more like it's made from a guy who was stranded on a desert island, and it's top notch.
And it's very clear. And when you watch the first series of Arrow, just in general, it's almost split into two halves, where the first half of the season, which is mostly created and produced before the show hits the air, where they're following what they think the CW wants for what is an expensive show for them. And then they start getting the audience feedback, and they start seeing what the performers are putting into it, and they start to veer the show in a different direction, which leads into what I think is a pretty decent end of season, and then just hits that amazing high of season 2 of Arrow, which is still one of the strongest complete seasons of any CW show.
100%. Yeah, this is definitely we're not sure how much of a comic book we want to make of it pilot.
Yeah. And that's why those soapy elements play such a strong role in the first season. The triangle between Laurel and Tommy and Oliver, for instance. All those things get so much more play than it feels is actually necessary for the show looking back on it.
Yeah, it's also kind of amazing to note how little of, I guess he's still the Hood at this point.
For a long time.
Yeah, he will be Hood for quite some time. He only has 2 scenes as the Hood in this entire episode.
Yeah, and both of them are fighty, actiony scenes. So shall we talk about Arrow and its action?
Yes, absolutely. Boy. Talk about a show that, first of all, I don't know if this was just me, but this pilot was actually fairly brutal.
Yeah, one of the key things that I think sets this show apart from the previous version is I don't think you could have taken Justin Hartley and had him go kill people.
No.
And it's interesting watching them go through this, because a big part of those first few years of Arrow was dealing with Ollie's morals, or lack of them, the fact that he does kill people, and the implications of that and what that means when he's then trying to be a hero.
They do lead into the fact that he is a man with a bow and arrow, and not a man with, punching bag bow and arrows, or punching glove bow and arrows.
Yeah, they are sharp things that stab people, basically.
And I was actually kind of amazed by how up close and personal some of the violence in this is. It's shot pretty well. That one scene, that first long chase scene where he just snaps the guy's neck, is, for network TV, for CW TV, kind of shocking to me. It's not something you see in those shows very much. And they were really willing to establish from the very beginning that he was a, particularly, like you say, kind of amoral superhero. Yeah.
It really does set the show on the course that it takes a long time to not correct, because I don't think there was anything particularly wrong with this course, but it's one that has implications that are being played off dramatically years down the line. The villain for series, I can't remember if it was 5 or 6, directly comes from the actions that Oliver takes here.
Yes.
As an example, in this, the pilot. But also then just sort of the general thing of how can you be a better person when you've done these things?
Right, and we're not even to the point in the pilot where doing this stuff bothers Oliver.
Yeah.
And it is going to take him a few episodes to kind of grow his conscience. But I am at least of the mind that the early violence in the show served a really great purpose. It immediately tonally separates it from anything DC had done on television before, because, previous to Smallville, there was the even goofier Lois and Clark.
Yep.
And I could, I guess I would kind of like to see Dean Cain's Superman snap a neck. That would be very odd.
Dean Cain would just do that nowadays.
That's true. I miss Dean Cain from the 90s.
The worst Superman.
He is the worst Superman. And the only Superman not to get to be Superman coming up. But we're definitely looking... I'm
sorry. Tim Daly's looking on and going, "Do not forget me!" And George Newman's going, hey, what about me?
I would love to see Tim Daly pop up in the Arrowverse, and I don't understand why he hasn't.
He's probably a bit expensive.
But, he really loved playing Superman.
Oh, he loves it. If you've ever seen his web show, I think it's called The Daily Show.
Yes.
Because his son Sam has also been Superman, and there's a couple of great ones. One where they induct Sam into the Superman Club, and the other where they do Batman v Superman with him and... I almost said Kevin Nealon. Oh, good grief, it's late here. But yeah, anyway, we're distracting ourselves.
Yes. We're talking about Aeronaut, very excellent web series that you should go find.
Yeah.
In addition to the just the sheer violence of it, I thought the fight choreography was a lot better than I remembered it being early on.
I mean, it wouldn't take Arrow long before it was producing some really phenomenal stuff for the small screen. I remember the mid-season finale where Arrow faces off against the Dark Archer or the Black Archer, whatever it was called, for the first time. And just how great that rooftop fight scene was. I remember just being so impressed with it. It's like, wow, that's great stuff. I remember the a key moment from the season 2 finale when Arrow and his allies go up against the gang of super strength Mirakuru fueled soldiers in Deathstroke masks, so it's easy to cast everyone. And the two armies clash. I thought, well, that's where you do the ad break. No, it just kept on going in one shot. And it was just really great because you could see people acting out their own little bits. There was just such scale to it and such ambition for a show coming out in, it was 2014 season 2 finished. I was like, holy crap, this is great.
And it was a phenomenal level of committing to it, because to me, WB fight scene, or CW fight scenes, I'm showing my age a little bit, CW fight scenes will always be the kind of kitschy, supernatural Buffy the Vampire Slayer thing. But yeah. Arrow, just even from this episode, was setting a very high bar for itself. One that it doesn't always reach, but it does a really good job of trying to get there.
Those Buffy fight scenes could be great, and they were at times, but one of the things that Arrow always shied away from, which other series didn't, is that quick cutting around the fight. So you do have long shots where there's multiple pieces of choreography going on in the same shot. And yes, they use stunt people, but you see Amel in those fight scenes a lot more than you might have seen on any other show. He's very committed to it, and as a physical performer, he's great. He can do, it's not just the salmon ladder, he can do a lot of this stuff, and also act through it.
Yeah, that's something I kind of wanted to mention, is that Stephen Amell really gets into the physicality of his character from the very beginning of the show. I think it takes him a couple more episodes to really get comfortable playing all the aspects of Oliver, but he really nails being the superhero. I mean, even when he's carrying himself as a civilian, you can see, oh yeah, this is the guy.
Yeah, his development as an actor is quite striking over the first couple of years of this show. He is not the best thing in the show by a long way at the start of it, at least from an emotional point of view, from a performance point of view. But once he gets into the physical stuff, he really sells that side of it. And he really gets so much better as things go on.
Yeah, and I think that's what you need from a show like this. Yes, he is surrounded by a very good supporting cast that makes up for his early shortcomings. But you can just look at the guy and say, oh yeah, this is a guy who can carry a show. Yeah.
And he not just carries a show, he ends up carrying an entire franchise.
Isn't that wild?
No one could have seen this when they started this. No one could have seen Supergirl and Legends of Tomorrow and actually doing Crisis on Infinite Earths. So I think the best they must have been looking at is going, well, we could probably do something like the Longbow Hunters at some point.
Which, speaking of, we got another little nod towards DC Comics of the past with Judge Grell in this episode.
Yep. And the kind of the bodyguard of the bad guy in this, Adam Hunt, his bodyguard is called... Oh, now I've forgotten it. Hold on, it's on this tab. Sorry, that's completely derailed this. Fuck's sake.
The magic of podcasts.
God, yeah. What's this sodden bodyguard's name? He's a character from the comics. Why isn't he listed anywhere? Oh, now I can't think of it. Greek Archer was a kind of nemesis for Green Arrow in the Judd Winnick run.
Oh,
Right, yeah. Was it Dracon?
I think so. Something like that.
I hope that's it.
Well, regardless...
Yes, there we are. Yeah, so the bodyguard of Adam Hunt is Dracon, who is a character who appeared a lot in the 2000s Green Arrow book, the one that was relaunched by Kevin Smith. But he was really Judd Winnick's character. Mm-hmm. And he's great. He's sort of the anti-Green Arrow. He's another archer, a martial artist. He's not the tallest guy in the world, and funnels that into everything, but he's a really formidable nemesis. And he's a great character. To see him just sort of thrown away so casually in here, he's dead by the end of the first episode. It's like, oh, there's missed opportunity there.
And that was very indicative of the first season of Arrow. Everybody died.
Yep, lots of death. And those that didn't got to be part of the Suicide Squad.
Right. Or their brothers did.
Yes.
When they recast.
That's Flash's trick. What's
yeah.
that?
Yes.
Well, that's fine. He could be his brother. We're the weather wizard.
We got, we're not that far off from, like you said, that back half of the first season. Arrow's going to start embracing its comic bookiness and really pushing forward. But this first half is very grounded, which means the best we're going to get is references.
Yeah.
Which, to me, I remember at least being a little bit excited about that, because for those of you who don't remember, comic book television shows did not used to be good. We're not too far removed between Arrow. Well, we're not far removed at all between Arrow and Smallville, but there were also shows like Birds of Prey on before this. Yeah,
that was best part of a decade previously.
Time is moving quickly, but those shows weren't really willing to go too far into the comic book stuff either, but Arrow seemed to have a good excuse for it. It wanted to be grounded, it wanted to be real, and sometimes it would throw nerds a bone, like giving the Judge the name of a great writer. And that was enough. I think that was enough for us at the time. If that had happened in like season 7 of that, then he definitely would have been like Warlock or something like that.
Yeah. So, at the end of all of this, the pilot was a huge success. 4.14 million viewers. It was a huge moment for the CW. Now, those figures pale in comparison to, for instance, the launch of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which was somewhere around, I think, the 12 million mark, and then the Supergirl launch when it was on ABC, which was sort of pushing 14 million. Which was huge. But for the CW, which is not one of the main networks, it doesn't have a huge number of hours of original programming. It's very much a destination channel rather than a, sure, whatever's on channel. It was a huge moment for them. And kind of the success of the show was really embedded within that, because shows had debuted for less and had been guaranteed a future. So I think there was definitely a feeling that there were legs to this. But it was really, as it moved beyond the first season, that Arrow really grew into the universe-spawning show that it became, not least of which because the second season featured the first appearance of Barry Allen, who would go on and headline The Flash.
And all of that is very funny to me, because I distinctly remember saying after seeing the pilot, like, oh, I should watch all of these episodes because there's only going to be about 6.
No, I'm very glad there weren't, because
I am too. This was a phenomenal success for CW, a network that had been a little floundering in terms of some of its entertainment options at that point. Supernatural was already going.
Yeah, I think it must have had about 7 or 8 seasons by this point.
So as far as I'm concerned, Supernatural has always been on, and it always will be on.
Oh my god, yes, it started in 2005, so yeah, the 8th season would have debuted alongside this. The Vampire Diaries was a thing by now, I seem to remember.
Yes, I think I remember CW very much having a reputation as kind of a older teen girls channel when Arrow debuted.
Yeah. Yes, between Supernatural and Vampire Diaries, it was kind of, oh, here's where you go for your dark fantasy with very attractive-looking male leads. Especially in terms of the Vampire Diaries, that's not the worst thing to do, considering this was before the fall of Twilight, shall we say?
Yes. And, I think there's some of that carries over very much into Arrow in terms of how it was cast and, like you said, the soap opera elements that were a big part of it, but this show just absolutely takes off, 5 or 6 episodes from this pilot and turns into the thing that is going to spawn, I guess, has to be a couple hundred episodes of TV by now.
Oh, way more than that. In fact, I wonder if it says on Wikipedia. Dan, it would not be a podcast if it wasn't for someone going, wait, what's this thing? Arrowverse. Does it give us a running count of how many episodes? I suppose it could include the web series as well.
Are we counting the Ray and Vixen in this?
Hard to tell. Plus 23. I'm just going with the live action ones as listed on Wikipedia. 23, 22, 2 plus 16, 17, 18, 16, 15 and 22 of that. So when this current TV season wraps up, there will be 520 individual episodes in the live action episodes in the Arrowverse, not including the animated spin-offs Vixen and Freedom Fighters The Ray.
And we could probably even go more if we want to go back and retroactively put in Matt Ryan's Constantine series.
Yeah, so that's another 13 which you could include as Matt Ryan's come into it. I don't think we're going to reach out and include Superman Returns and all of Smallville and Birds of Prey and Batman Beyond and everything else.
Yes, that's right, because within the next month or two, everything that DC has ever put on TV is going to be part of the same multiverse.
Yeah.
Officially.
There's a lot. But
one more thing I wanted to talk about real quickly is, what were you surprised not to see in the pilot?
I was kind of surprised to see no blatant references to the Kevin Smith relaunch.
Right.
Because that was such a huge moment. So, in the mid-90s, Oliver Queen died. He got his arm strapped into a bomb and wouldn't let Superman save him or something like that. And his book was taken over for a while by his son, Connor Hawke, who he basically didn't know that he had. At the time of his death. They'd met, but he didn't know the relationship. And then the book went away because it got cancelled, and then Kevin Smith relaunched it, and it was a huge relaunch. It sold gangbusters. It's actually a pretty good read as well.
It really is. It's still, to this day, I think it's one of my favorite Arrow stories.
Mark Guggenheim did share on Twitter one of the original pitch documents for Arrow, which included, I want to say Thea's name was spelt differently, but it included as part of the cast a character called Stanley Dover, who, a name very familiar if you've read the Quiver storyline.
Right.
And he's a character who has since turned up, but is no way as important a part of the show as it was intended to be. My guess is because Stanley Dover is an older character, they were seeking a notable name to play him, and when they couldn't get one, or probably couldn't afford one, they dropped it. So there's that. And one thing that really surprised me, in all these years, we've never had Connor Hawke on the show.
We have had Connor Hawke.
Is this spoilers for an episode I haven't seen?
No, it's just Connor Hawke is not the Connor Hawke you're thinking of him being.
Oh, yes, he was in Legends of Tomorrow, wasn't he?
And now he has been on this most recent series of Arrow. Yes, he is a very different character, though.
So he's John Diggle's son rather than Oliver Queen's son.
Yes.
He's still a character of colour, which is important because one of the things that tends to be forgotten is that Connor Hawke was, what was his ethnicity? It was definitely not white.
Variable.
Variable depending on who the colorist is, yes, for sure. I want to say he was Latin, but I could have got that wrong. But he was not a white character. Here we are. Mixed Asian, African, and European heritage. His mother was half black and half Korean. His father, Oliver, is white. So, yeah, I got that one wrong entirely. But, yeah, it really depends on who's colouring and who remembers that this character is supposed to be not white.
I will say, I think Thea has some definite shades of Mia.
Mia Durden, yep.
But, yeah, it is largely gone from...
Yeah, that includes the Speedy reference.
Yeah, it's just... Yeah, you're absolutely right, though. I think Quiver was probably the biggest, most recent Green Arrow story at the time this show came out, and it was fairly old by that. But yeah, it's just there are no references.
Yeah, probably at least a decade by then. I think it was 2001.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yes. I was also surprised. I guess I had it in my head that Malcolm Merlin was in the pilot.
No, they keep him back. Not for too long, but they do keep him back. So John Barrowman doesn't get to feature in our conversations. Get out, Barrowman.
It's okay. He'll be around the Arrowverse plenty.
Absolutely. Yeah, so anything else you want to throw in on this one now?
The only thing I have left is the voiceover is something that got dropped relatively quickly after the pilot, and I think we're all the better for it.
Yes, although we would get the, my name is Oliver Queen, or the, my favourite is, my name is Barry Allen, and I'm the fastest man alive.
We established that far too early, and it won't ever go away.
I mean, it's no way near as bad as To Every Generation There Is Born a Slayer, one that we would get for seasons of Buffy, or even worse, the US and the narration for Series 5 of Doctor Who.
Oh, no.
Which is just terrible. But those things become quite tropey in and of themselves. And they're, I don't particularly like them, but it would feel weird if we didn't have a variant of them. It's kind of nice, especially the Supergirl one, the way that changes as the series changes and its focuses change.
Yes. And, I guess without it, we probably wouldn't know how bad it was when people failed this city.
Yep.
But it is a device. I think you can tell they were playing around a lot in the pilot about what this show would become, or with what this show would become.
Yeah.
And not everything works. They hang on to a surprising amount of it for a long time, Verdant. And the rest of it, it'll be... I watched the second episode last night just because I wanted to see how it changed from the pilot, and the first half of the show, we keep this stuff, and then it goes away, never to be heard from again.
But yeah, I think for me, the one thing to take away is just how many changes have we been through in the show since then. Not just sort of that sort of gentle retooling you do once you go to series, once you find what works, but how many changes Arrow has made over the years to its very core structure. And yeah, it's a testament that it has never really sat around not doing something different. It's not always worked. I think as anyone who survived series 3 and 4 knows, the show has struggled with quality at times. But yeah, it was a real surprise for me to come out, for instance, of series 7 and going, wow, I think that might have been the best season this year. And then just how well it's playing its final stretch, and how with its nods to the past and keeping things moving forward. So yeah, a lot has come from this episode. A lot.
It is. For my money, it's probably the best pilot of the Arrow verse. At least the one that ends up having the most impact. I have issues with a couple of the other ones.
I mean, when you say most impact, you're kind of going, well, you guys can't win because you were just part of a universe, you didn't spawn it.
You're absolutely right there.
See, I would hold up the Flash and the Supergirl pilots as good ones. I'd lock most of the first season of Legends of Tomorrow in a box and pretend it never happened.
I don't know what you're talking about with Legends of Tomorrow. It started when they met the JSA, and you can't convince me otherwise.
And I've only seen the first episode of Batgirl, so I've only seen the pilot in and of itself, so I don't really know how well that holds up in terms of the full season.
Legends aside, I think all of the pilots are very strong. Arrow just does particularly well, largely because of the last 2 or 3 seasons of the show, where it's a constant touchstone for for how the show's going to finish off. And that might happen with the rest of the shows too. But for right now, it's so joyful to be able to look back and say, yes, it started. Yes, it's very different than it used to be, but this pilot very much matters for what the show still is.
Yeah. And with that, I think that we've come to the end of this. I hope we've passed the audition. As someone once famously said whilst hogging the top of a roof and causing a traffic jam below. Adam, you tell everyone where they can find you and if they want to.
You can find me at The Pariah Effect on Twitter and Tumblr and virtually every other form of social media. Couple projects in the works, so watch those spaces if you want to hear me ramble some more. And what about you?
And you can find me, I'm on Twitter as QuizLacey, QuizLacey. You can find my podcast, The Fantasticast, at thefantasticast.com and at Fantasticast on Twitter. If you jump on board now, you can join us to endure the last days of the Munch-Sienkiewicz run before we hit the John Byrne run in the first quarter of 2020.
Oh, I really like John Byrne in that one.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, he works well with the other Byrnes. And really with that, I think we're pretty much done. So thank you very much. I'm sure if you stick around, you'll hear another couple of people auditioning to be the Super Sons as they talk about The Flash. It'll be here quicker than you think. Hey.
Good luck at Arkham, guys.
What's that? Never come back on the show? Okay.